Hey guys, and welcome to another video from Quant Masters on TCS NQT 2020 solutions. This is Shashank here, your technical trainer, and let's begin to solve the second series of questions within TCS NQT 2020. Now, as we have gone through our previous videos, you guys already know that this has 10 MCQs and 2 programs to be solved. Where 10 MCQs you'll have 15 minutes to solve, and the 2 programs you'll be having 45 minutes to solve. So let's get started without any delay. So let's begin with the MCQs. The first MCQ we got was this. The primary mission of an analyst or system designer is to do what exactly? And the options come up as extract physical requirements of the user and convert them to software, calculate return of investment, create a data flow diagram, and development of software evaluation tool. Now, this question is about the primary mission of an analyst or system designer. A system designer or analyst is the person who works at the initial stages of software development life cycle. That is, their work is to make sure that the requirements of the software are available, the feasibility is made sure of. That is, the software is financially feasible, technically feasible, and so on. So the option here is A. That is, extract physical requirements of the user and convert them to the software. Once this basic design is done, then comes data flow diagram, then comes the software evaluation tool, and then comes the return of investment, for which the system designer is not a big part of. So option A is the right answer here. So let's go on to the next question. The question is, what will be the return value of fseek function if error occurs? Now, fseek is a function to go to a particular position within a file. So fseek returns 0 when successful, and it returns a non-zero value when unsuccessful. So the option here is A, any non-zero value. Now these are some theoretical questions. Let's go on and see what other questions are asked. Now the next question comes up as this. You have an integer m equals 10, n equals 5, n equals 35, p equals 5, and d equals 6. Now the question is, they've given 2 statements and they're asking us what is the difference in output between the 2 statements. Is there a difference in precedence? Does it differ by 10 or 20, or is it the same? So let's try figuring this out. So if we observe these 2 statements, both of the statements have multiplication, division, and plus. Now when you talk about precedence of operators in C, we know that multiplication and division have same precedence. Only addition has lower or lesser precedence than multiplication or division. Now whenever anything has same precedence, we know the execution is left to right. So in this case, since multiplication and division have higher precedence than plus, we're going to bracket out whatever is there for multiplication and division. Same goes for the next statement as well. So when you compare these 2 statements, the first one is m into n and then p by d. Whatever the result is there, you're adding them. Same goes for the next one. P by d is calculated, m into n is calculated, whatever is the result that gets added. So it's basically, you can say, a plus b and b plus a. There's literally no difference because whatever is in bracket will be executed before addition. So the result here is option B, same. Now let's go on to the next question. That is, which of the following is incorrect syntax for function declaration with default argument? Now, default argument is where you can create a function and specify a value for a variable in a function, so that whenever the variable is not sent as a parameter, it takes a default value or a default argument. Let's just take the look at one small example in order to understand this question clearly. So let's take a look at this function. We have a function called void fun and we have a variable int a within this, and all we are doing here is just printing a. Now to everyone, you need to note that default argument is not present in C, it's only present in C++ and Java. It's not available in C at all. So that's why I'm taking up C out as the statement here. If you call this function with something like fun of 10, we know that 10 is sent as A and it's printing 10. If you don't send a variable, however, you will get an error. Now, to make sure this error does not occur, you can give a default value of A as 10, so that whenever a value is not sent over here, it's gonna by default say that, hey, we haven't sent a value here. So what are we gonna do? I'm not sure. So if such a value is not given default, it would give an error. But if you give a default value, it says like, hey, I'm calling function fun. A is optional because we have a default value for A that is 10. It is optional. Now, since it's optional, it makes sure that there's no need to enter the value of A. It just stores it as 10 here directly instead. If you send a value, however, it's not going to store it as 10. Instead, it's going to be 20. So this is basically what default arguments are. Now, if we look at this question, there's a rule within default argument that we need to know. So let's just look at what is that particular rule. So here's the rule. If we have three variables within a function, and if I want C to be default, I can give a default value of C equals 10. So when we call this function with only two values like 10 and 20, it works. 10 is sent as A, 20 is sent as B. There's no C value, it's by default is 10. But if you try to do something like let B have a default value, you cannot call the function like 10 comma and 30, so that A is sent, A is received with a value 10, B is not there, and C is received with a value 30. That is impossible in your programming languages. If you want to make B with a default value, the reason it's impossible because you can't use double commas and skip a variable in between. If you want to make B as 10, if you want to give a default value for the variable B, you have to start from right side. Default values for variables must be given from right to left order. B can only have a default variable if C has a default variable. That's when you can send fun of, let's say, something like 5. So 5 will be sent to A, B and C will be default as 10. This is the rule. So if we look at the first option, X is 10, Y is 20, Z is 30. We are following right to left order. That works. For the second one also, we are following right to left order. Z and then Y. For the third one also, we are following right to left order. Only Z is default. So it works. But for the last one, we are making sure a variable in the middle of the argument list is default without keeping Z as default. So the option which does not follow the default argument parameter is option D. So this does not follow the correct declaration. So option D is the answer to go for this. So let's go for the next question. When we implement a stack using linked list, then which of the following is true? Now, we know whenever it's a linked list, we insert from one end and delete from the same end. In a queue, insert from one end, delete from the other end. So, if you observe this, you can directly cancel up a couple of options. Option B says insertion of node is done from beginning and deletion from end. That is not true. Option D says insertion of node is done from end and deletion is done from beginning. That is also not. So you can directly cancel out option B and option D. So now comes, which is the right answer? Is it option A or C? Because option A says insertion is done from end, deletion is also done from end. Whereas option C says insertion is done from beginning, deletion is also done from beginning. So in a stack, when we enter values, are we entering at the end of the stack and it goes to the beginning of the stack, or are we entering at the beginning of the stack and it goes to the end of the stack? So the answer here is option C, because we always insert from the beginning of the stack. And when you insert an element at the beginning of the stack, it falls down till the end. You take up one more element, insert it at the beginning of the stack, take one more, for instance, and so on. So the option here is option C, where insertion is done from the beginning and deletion is also done from the beginning of the stack. So let's go for the next question, which is a match the following with the following table given and these options. So all you need to do is figure out where A, B, C and D matches to its appropriate function result on the right. So on the left side of the table, we have four options A, B and C and A, B, C and D, which are functions. We're supposed to figure out what is the result of these functions on the right side. So let's search for it. So the first one is ceiling. Ceiling function always gives you the higher integer value. If it's 3.1, you get 4. If it's 3.9 also, you get 4. Whereas floor is the opposite of it. Ceiling is a function which gives you a higher result. Floor is a function which gives you the lower result. Even if it's 3.99, the result you get is 3.0. So if you look at the first two options, A and B, A points to ceiling of 3.6. So ceiling will need to convert it to 4 and the result you have is option 5. So A represents option 5 and that is correct in option A and option C. So option B and D are out of contention for us. So let's go for the next one, that is option B. So B is floor. Floor will always take its integer value irrespective of the decimal point, whether it's 0.1 or 0.9. So its result is directly ahead of it, which is option 2. Now both A and C option point to point to option 2. Then comes option C, which is power. So always note, power works like this. Power of A comma B is calculated as A to the power of B. Similarly, here in our case, we have power of 2 comma 5, which comes up to be 2 power 5, which is 32. So the option we end up with is option 1. So option 1 means only one of these is now true for us, that is option C so far. But if you observe option D, there's something slightly wrong in it. ABS gives you absolute value. So absolute value as in every negative value is converted to positive value in the result. So its result is supposed to be 3. So absolute is supposed to give you 12.0, not 0. So the option is supposed to be C if this is 3 or if this is 1. Unfortunately, based on the result, based on the question we have obtained, the right option was not provided, but if it was provided, it would have been one of these. So that is one thing to note for. Now let's go ahead for the next. So the question is, what does the following statement print? You have a simple statement with. So the next question is, what does the following statement print? We have a statement which just prints one single integer percentage %d with a ternary operator. Now if you look at this ternary operator, it's not in the right format. So let's see what happens here. So ternary operator goes something like this. You have A question mark B colon C. In other words, you have a statement or a condition followed by a question mark and a true statement colon a false statement. So we are checking the condition. If the condition is true, this true statement will be executed. Otherwise, if it's false, this false statement will be executed. So it has one question mark and one colon. But in our question, we have two question marks and two colons. So at initial look, it doesn't look like it's of the right format. So we may say, hey, it's got to be compile time error. But there's one thing we need to know. This is a ternary operator within a ternary operator. So by default, your compiler is going to make this bracketed, this internal or inside ternary operator will execute first, followed by the next one. So what happens here is, this inner ternary operator is supposed to execute first. That will give you a result. it will give you a single digit or single number result. Whatever that single number comes up, then you have 25 question mark that number colon 25. So if it is true, it prints this number, else it prints this number. So let us write this down and execute it. But before we do that, we have one slight issue here. Ternary operators are where we are supposed to write condition and then a true statement or a false statement. But here we do not have a condition. So what exactly happens? So it's not necessary that you have to write a condition. You just have to make sure to write anything here which either indicates true or false. Now in programming language, C, C++ or Java, whichever you take, we know that any non-zero value is considered to be true and the zeros are considered to be false. So we will look at this and state that, hey, 25 is a non-zero value. Since it is non-zero value, it's supposed to be true. So it's supposed to execute true part. So like this, let's try to solve this whole equation. Now students, if you observe here, when we go for the inner ternary operator, we have this as our condition, which is non-zero. When it is non-zero, we know it's same as true. Since it is true, in our ternary operator, for this condition, the true part will execute and the true part is returning 0. So let us make sure that this whole ternary operator now is replaced by its true result, which is 0. So you can say this is same as 25 question mark 0 colon 25. Now if you observe, now that the inner ternary operator is performed, the calculation is done and we got the result, let's go for the outer ternary operation. Now it's 25, if true return 0, if false return 25. Now 25 is a non-zero value, which means it is considered to be true, so it will return 0 and that 0 will be taken up to percentage %d in order to print. So your option here is option C, 0. Now let's go for the next question. The next question is where you have to enter the result in numerals. That is, they will not be giving you the options. You have to enter the result by. If you look at the question, it says when we execute this code, what will be the output? So let's try to figure it out. So let's begin with this. So since this is based on C++, where you have something called reference variables. Reference variables are identified as, if you have, let's say, int a equals 10 and you have something like int ampersand b equals a. Now this is considered to be an error in C language as well as Java, but in C++, this means that b is a variable which points to same address as a. In other words, a will be storing 10, b will also be pointing to same address where a is storing 10. So that means if you change a, b also changes. If we change b, a also changes. So in our question, we are doing the exact same thing here, whereas we are sending x and y over here, and x is stored as another variable int ampersand x, y is stored as another variable int ampersand y. In other words, what we can say here is, within this function, you have two reference variables x and y, which point to same address of x and y that is present within main. Now at first glance you can say like, hey, it is a swap function. Since this x and y variable point to same address as x and y within main, they have to make sure it is swapped. So output is supposed to be 2010. But you need to observe these statements first. So let's assume this x is pointing to our variable x as 10, y is pointing to our variable y as 20. So I'll just write them here also as 10 and 20. Note, if these are changed, these also should change because these are reference variables. And we have a new variable called temp. Now the first thing you're doing here is storing x in temp, line 6. So let us execute that. X is stored in temp, so temp becomes 10. The next statement is y is stored in x. So let us store y to x. So x will now become from 10 to 20. Once this is done, your last statement is x equals temp. That means we are storing temp back in X. So when temp is stored back in X, 20 is now changed back to 10. If we don't observe this line, we get to think that hey, it's a swap, output is 1020, but it's not 1020. You're not storing y back into x, you're storing temp back into x. So output is supposed to be 1020 itself. So the same 1020 is reflected even here. This also becomes 1020, and hence 1020 is the output you're supposed to enter in numerals. So now let's go for the next. So the next question is asked as what is the output of this particular program. So let's try it out. It's a simple statement. It's just one for loop statement. Let's figure. So if you observe this, there are no statements after the for loop. The for loop ends with a semicolon. When a for loop ends with a semicolon, it basically means that there are no statements in for loop. You can just execute the condition and increment decrement as it is. So let's begin. So students, let's begin solving this. So let's take a variable I and j. So let's assume at the start of our main function, the first statement is I is 1 and j is 1. So we'll also do the same thing, that is I is equal to 1 and j is equal to 1. Now the first thing you see is there are no statements in semicolon. The first thing you see is there are no statements in the for loop. That is, when a for loop ends with a semicolon, that basically means that it is empty brackets. There are no statements in it. So considering there are no statements in it, we just have to execute the initialization, condition and the increment decrement in order by looping condition and increment decrement until condition becomes false. So let's begin with this. So first let's go for the initialization. There is no initialization at all. Before initialization we have I equals 1 and j equals 1. So let's keep it as it is. There's no initialization. Let's go for condition. Condition is j less than equal to I. J is 1. It is less than or equal to I, which is 1. It is equal to 1. So condition is true. So let's go for the next part. After condition is true, we are supposed to execute statements, but there are no statements here. So let's directly go on to our increment or decrement part, which is printing something. And what we are supposed to print here is first I. So let us print I, which is 1. After I, we are printing hyphen. So let's print hyphen. After that, we are printing j++. Now we all know this is post increment. So that means I'm supposed to print j, which is 1. After printing j, I'm supposed to increase it to a value 2. So once this entire print statement is done, let's go back to condition, which is j less than equal to I, which is now if you check, 2 is not less than equal to 1. 2 is greater than 1. This condition is false. Since it is false, it exits the for loop and finishes the program. So your output is 1-1. So let's go for the next question, students. That is, what will be the output of this particular code? Now, this code is written in Java and it is based on methods, and we'll go into this in slight detail. Now, the first thing is you have a class called main, which is extending another class called test1. So the question here is, we are creating an object of main class, and note one thing, after along with creation of an object for main class, main is inheriting test1. That means main inherits everything within test1. So if you observe, you have a function called static int add of abc in test1. Of course, there's another one called AB. Let's not worry about that because here you have method overloading. Now, when you have static int ABC in test1 as well as main, and you're calling this main object's add function, will it call add of test class or main class? Because the same function is available in main class and the same function is available within test class. So if you try to figure out whether it will call this function or this particular function, you need to know one thing. Whenever a class inherits another class. Whatever is the function in the base class, it must be assigned same privileges or stronger privileges in its derived class. Here what we are doing is, we are taking a protected function in base class and we are assigning it default access specifier in derived class, because remember in Java there is default and then public. So we know that private is the strongest, then protected is weaker than private, then default is weaker than protected, public is the weakest. Now whenever you inherit a function from base class to derived class, the inherited function must not have weaker privileges than the function in base class. That is, if it's protected, you cannot make it public or you cannot make it default as well. You can only make it either protected or a stricter privilege, that is private. So here, since we are assigning it a weaker privilege in the derived class, you will get an error saying assigning weaker privilege for add function. So the output is an error for this, that is compile time error. So these were the MCQs for the TCS NQT of this series. We'll go through the coding questions of the same in the next videos, guys. Thank you for watching and make sure you guys subscribe and like, and do check the description of the video to know more about our programs. Thank you.